I knew moving out to the lake would bring me peace and quiet. No HOA drama, no nosy neighbors, just me, the water, and the property I worked hard for. At least, that's what I thought until she showed up. You know the type, clipboard in hand? Sunglasses glued to her face and the confidence of someone who thinks they own the entire neighborhood. Around here, everyone called her the Lake Queen. But I just called her Karen. It started the very first week. She marched onto my driveway. No hello, no welcome, just a lecture. "We need you to sign these HOA documents immediately," she said, like it was a demand, not a request. I told her calmly, "I didn't buy into an HO. My deed is clear." "I own this property outright?" Her smile tightened. She wasn't used to hearing no. The next day I noticed little things, anonymous notes taped to my mailbox about community standards. My trash can was moved from the side of the house to the curb with a passive-aggressive sticky note. "This is not how we do things here." Karen was trying to break me down, force me into her little club. But what she didn't know was that I wasn't her tenant. I wasn't her neighbor. I was her landlord. See, here's the kicker. Karen's lakefront dream home? She didn't own it. She rented it. From me. Yep. The very HOA enforcer trying to bully me into signing papers was paying me rent every single month to live in a house she bragged about like it was hers. And when she tried to play power games with me, I had to laugh inside. Because if anyone had the real power here, it wasn't her. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no, when I refused to comply, she escalated. One afternoon, I heard sirens and saw flashing lights outside my property. She had actually called the cops, claiming I was violating community HOA rules by refusing to sign. The officer knocked on my door, confused as to why he was even there. I handed him my deed and said, "There is no OA here. She's renting. Check the records." The look on his face was priceless. But Karen, she was fuming. Standing behind the officer with her arms crossed, she barked, "This man is disrupting the neighborhood. He has to follow our bylaws." I turned to her, calm as ever, and said, "I don't have to follow your bylaws." "Karen," I said, holding up the paperwork for the officer. "Because unlike you, I actually own my home." The officer skimmed through the documents, nodding slowly, clearly realizing this was nothing more than a neighborly power trip. Karen's face turned red. She started sputtering about how everyone around the lake had to obey the HOA, how I was setting a bad example and undermining community values. The officer raised an eyebrow and asked her, "Ma'am, do you have proof he's part of your association?" That shut her up for a moment, but she wasn't about to back down in front of an audience. She jabbed a finger toward me. "If he refuses, we'll fine him. We'll take legal action if we have to." The officer looked almost amused. "You can't fine someone who's not in your HOA," he said flatly, then turned to me with a shrug. "This seems like a civil dispute, not a police matter." That's when I dropped the bomb she never saw coming. Calmly, I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Karen, you might want to cool down before you make things worse. Because you do realize whose name is on your lease, right?" Her mouth opened, then closed again. She tilted her head like she misheard me. I walked back inside and came out with a folder. Right there, in black and white, was her rental agreement with my signature at the bottom as her landlord. I didn't even have to hand it to the officer. He leaned over, glanced at the first page, and raised his eyebrows at her. "So, you're renting from him?" The silence that followed was golden. Karen's jaw clenched so tight I thought her sunglasses would snap in half. The officer gave her a polite nod and told her, "Ma'am, I think you two should sort this out privately. But as far as I can see, he's within his rights." Then the squad car pulled away, leaving Karen standing on my lawn, absolutely humiliated. But instead of backing off, Karen doubled down. The very next week, I noticed she had organized a little patrol. A few neighbors, clearly guilt-tripped or manipulated by her, started circling past my driveway with clipboards, writing down petty infractions, like the color of my shutters or how I parked too close to the lake dock. She was desperate to prove she had authority, but every move she made just dug her deeper into a hole she couldn't climb out of. And the thing is, she didn't even know how close she was to losing it all, because while she was busy trying to force me into her area, she had completely forgotten the one person who could change her entire living situation with a single letter. Every time I looked outside, there they were, Karen's little army of clipboard warriors, pacing back and forth like mall cops with nothing better to do. One guy even crouched down to measure the height of my mailbox, muttering about regulations. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so pathetic. But instead of reacting, I stayed calm, because I knew something Karen didn't. All this time, she was building a case against herself. See, she was so focused on enforcing rules on property she didn't control, she wasn't paying attention to her lease obligations. And that's where things started to unravel. Her rent check, late twice, maintenance requests, ignored because she was too busy policing my lawn instead of handling the busted screen door I told her about weeks earlier. She thought she was untouchable, but in reality, she was giving me every legal reason I needed to take action. The funniest part? She actually came storming up to my porch one evening with a folder of her own. She slapped it down on the railing and said, "These are the violations you've racked up. If you don't sign, we're escalating this to the HOA board." I didn't even bother to open it. I just slid her rental contract out of my folder and laid it on top of hers. "Karen," I said quietly, "you don't have the authority to fine me, but I do have the authority to evict you." Her eyes flickered. For a split second, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. She snatched her folder back, muttered something about miscommunication, and stomped off. But I could tell she wasn't giving up. Karen wasn't wired that way. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a certified letter in the mail. It was some long-winded nonsense about mandatory compliance and community action, clearly drafted by Karen herself on her home printer. The kicker? She had signed it as HOA president. The problem was, there was no HOA president, because legally there was no HOA at all. She had basically just committed fraud in writing. At that point, I realized this wasn't just a power trip anymore, it was war. And if she wanted to play games, I was ready to bring the one card she could never beat. When that letter showed up, I knew Karen had crossed the line from being a nuisance to making herself legally vulnerable. Pretending to be the president of a non-existent HOA wasn't just laughable, it was something a judge would take very seriously. I tucked the letter into my growing folder of evidence and decided to wait. Because sometimes the smartest move isn't to fight right away, it's to let the other person dig their own hole deeper. Meanwhile, Karen ramped things up. She started holding HOA meetings in her living room, dragging in a handful of neighbors who probably had no idea she was running this fake organization. She even went as far as putting up little paper notices on utility poles that read, "Community rules will be enforced. Non-compliance will result in fines." I tore one down, and sure enough, her signature was stamped at the bottom. What she didn't realize was that every fake fine, every letter, every official notice she spread around the neighborhood was just more proof for my case. And the best part? She was still paying me rent late, sloppy, and with complaints attached, but still paying. The irony was delicious. She was financing her own downfall without even knowing it. Then came the night she pushed things too far. I was out by the dock, enjoying the sunset, when Karen stormed over with a couple of her clipboard patrol members. She pointed at my boat and shouted, "That violates HOA lake restrictions. You're not allowed to keep it tied up overnight." The two neighbors looked embarrassed, like they'd rather be anywhere else, but Karen was in full crusade mode. I didn't yell back. I didn't even stand up. I just looked her square in the eye and said, "Karen, if you don't stop harassing me, the next notice you get won't be from your fake HOA, it'll be from a lawyer." That hit her harder than I expected. For the first time, she hesitated. She tried to cover it up with bluster, but I saw it. The cracks were forming. What she didn't know was that I had already contacted my attorney. The eviction papers were drafted, the documentation was airtight, and the clock was ticking. Every threat, every phony rule, every time she tried to weaponize authority she didn't have, it was all about to come crashing down on her and the Moment she realized I wasn't bluffing was the moment the entire neighborhood finally saw Karen for who she really was. After that night by the dock, Karen's behavior went from bossy to desperate. She started doubling down on her fake HO campaign like a gambler who refuses to walk away from the table. New flyers appeared on windshields. She even slipped envelopes under doors with official-looking warnings typed in bold red letters. To anyone not paying attention, it looked convincing that I knew better. And more importantly, I had every single one of those papers saved, dated, and ready to use. Neighbors began whispering. People who once nodded along at her rules started realizing they'd never actually signed anything. A few even came to me privately and asked if what she was doing was legal. I told them the truth. There is no HOA. She's bluffing. That rumor spread faster than Karen could print her next fake fine. And that's when she made her biggest mistake yet. One afternoon, I came home to find a bright orange paper taped to my front door in huge block letters. Final notice. Pay all HOA fees or face property lien. She had taken it upon herself to threaten legal action over debts that didn't exist. That wasn't just petty, it was criminal. I stood there on the porch, holding that notice, and couldn't help but laugh. She had no idea she'd just handed me the golden ticket. Because once you start threatening liens and money that isn't owed, you've crossed into fraud and harassment. My lawyer didn't just have a case anymore, he had an airtight hammer to swing. But here's the kicker. While she was busy plotting her next rule enforcement, she had no idea her own future at the lake was already slipping away. Because the eviction clock I'd started, it was still ticking down. And when it hit 0, Karen wasn't just going to lose her fake title of HOA president. She was going to lose the very house she bragged about ruling from. The day she finally realized it was coming was the day everything changed. The orange final notice was still flapping on my door when I decided it was time to stop playing defense. I called my lawyer, handed over the entire stack of fun HOA documents Karen had scattered around the neighborhood, and within days the paperwork was ready. Official, stamped, and legally binding, unlike anything Karen had ever tried to pull. Meanwhile, she kept parading around like she was queen of the lake. She even started referring to herself as Madam President during her so-called meetings. Neighbors were catching on fast, though. People stopped showing up. Some even returned her flyers with notes like, "This isn't legal. Stop bothering." The U.S., you could feel the tide turning, but Karen was too far gone to notice. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. A quiet Tuesday morning, Karen strutting up my driveway with her usual arrogance, except this time, I was the one holding the envelope. She launched right into another rant about my boat, my lawn, and pending fines her HO had supposedly approved. I didn't interrupt her. I just handed her the envelope and said, "Funny, you mentioned pending notices, Karen. Here's yours." She looked down at it, confused at first, then started reading. Her face went pale. Eviction, 30 days to vacate. All legal, all documented, all final. For the first time since this battle began, she didn't have a comeback ready. She stammered, tried to laugh it off, then accused me of abusing power. But the neighbors across the street were watching, and they could see exactly what was happening. Karen wasn't in charge anymore. She was cornered. And the more she tried to spin it, the worse it got. She waved the papers around like they were fake, shouting that I had no right, but deep down she knew the truth. She could write all the funny HOA rules in the world, but at the end of the day, the only contract that mattered was the one with my name at the bottom, and the clock had just started ticking on her reign. After that day on my driveway, the whole neighborhood knew something had shifted. Word spread fast that the self-proclaimed HOA president had just been served eviction papers. You could almost feel the relief in the air. Neighbors who had been quietly tolerating Karen's power trips finally realized she wasn't untouchable. But Karen? She didn't take it quietly. Oh no, she went into overdrive. Within hours, she was knocking on doors, waving her hands, warning people that I was the real problem. She claimed I was a slumlord, that I was targeting her because she was enforcing order. She even tried to start a petition to protect the neighborhood from me. The problem was, Nobody signed. People were done with her drama. One night, I caught her stapling new flyers to the telephone poles. Desperate, sloppy, the ink smudged like she had rushed them off her printer at 2 a.m. this time. The papers claimed she was being illegally evicted and that she needed community support to fight back. But instead of rallying the neighbors, all she managed to do was confirm to everyone just how unhinged she'd become. Meanwhile, the legal clock kept ticking. 30 days became 20. Then 15. Every day she walked past me with that same forced confidence, sunglasses on, chin high, but her eyes told the real story. She was cracking. And when the mail carrier delivered the official court notice confirming the eviction filing, she couldn't hide it anymore. I watched her from across the street as she tore the letter open, her hands shaking, lips pressed tight. She glanced up and saw me standing on my porch, calm and collected. That was the first time Karen didn't glare. She looked away, but just because she knew she was losing didn't mean she was ready to go down quietly. If anything, her desperation was about to reach a whole new level. With the eviction notice hanging over her head, Karen's tactics got wild. She started staging little HOA patrols by herself, marching up and down the street with a clipboard like she still had an audience. Neighbors mostly ignored her, but sometimes I'd catch them peeking through blinds, whispering and shaking their heads. The same people she used to intimidate were now laughing at her behind closed doors. Then came her next stunt. She actually tried to call an emergency HOA meeting in her driveway. She set up folding chairs, dragged out a podium she must have borrowed, and even put up a hand-painted sign that read, Community Leadership Summit. Only 2 people showed up, an elderly couple who thought it was a garage sale. Karen stood there for over an hour, talking into a microphone that wasn't even plugged in, lecturing to an empty row of chairs like she was still in charge. By now, I didn't even have to lift a finger. She was destroying her own credibility. Faster than I ever could. But I wasn't just sitting back either. My lawyer and I were quietly finalizing everything. Her late rent payments, the harassment, the fraudulent notices, all of it documented, neat and ready. Every time she tried. Another stunt. It just made my case stronger. Still, Karen wasn't ready to quit. One afternoon, I caught her slipping something into my mailbox. I pulled it out and nearly laughed out loud. It was a cease and desist order written on printer paper, accusing me of landlord harassment and failure to comply with HOA bylaws. She had even signed it with a fake legal seal. She must have printed off Google. I tucked it into my growing evidence folder, another nail in her coffin. As the eviction clock ticked down into the single digits, her mask started slipping. No more smug smirks, no more sunglasses and fake confidence. She still tried to act like the queen of the lake, but the cracks were obvious. And the closer we got to that final day, the more frantic she became. She wasn't just fighting to stay in that house anymore, she was fighting to hold on to the little empire she'd built in her head. With just a week left on the clock, Karen went from annoying to outright unhinged. Every day brought a new stunt, like she thought if she made enough noise, she could scare me into backing off. She knocked on doors begging for signatures on a petition to stop the illegal eviction of the HOA president. Most neighbors shut the door politely, a few slammed it. One even told her flat out, "There is no HOA, Karen, stop embarrassing yourself?" The more people turned against her, the more frantic she became. One night, just after midnight, I saw headlights flash across my window. I stepped outside to find Karen standing at the edge of my driveway with her phone out, recording me like I was some kind of criminal. She shouted into the camera that I was harassing tenants and breaking community laws. I didn't say a word, I just stood there calmly while she unraveled on film. The irony was, her little video was only more proof of her harassment. A couple of days later, she tried another power play. I came home to find my dock roped off with yellow caution tape and a sign that read, Property Condemned, Lake Echo Authority. I didn't even bother tearing it down. I called my lawyer, snapped photos, and added them to the evidence pile. Karen thought she was intimidating me. All she was doing was making my case stronger. But the moment I knew she was truly desperate came when I overheard her in the grocery store. She was cornering one of the neighbors in the produce aisle, whispering loudly about how she was going to file an injunction to stop me and get the county involved. The neighbor looked uncomfortable, nodded politely, and walked away without saying a word. By then, nobody was taking her seriously. The countdown was almost over. The eviction hearing was set, the paperwork was solid, and all Karen could do was scramble for control she never really had. She strutted around like she was still in charge, but everyone could see it now. The queen of the fake HOA was standing on quicksand, and the ground was about to disappear beneath her. With only a few days left before the court date, Karen's mask completely slipped. The calm, smug, sunglasses-wearing HOA president was gone. In her place was someone frantic, pacing the street at odd hours, clutching her phone like it was a weapon. She'd knock on doors late at night, insisting the neighborhood was under siege, and that if she went down, everyone else would suffer too. By then, most neighbors stopped even answering. They'd just watch through their blinds as she stomped away, muttering to herself. One morning, I opened my blinds and found a brand new sign hammered into the grass at the entrance of the neighborhood. Private community, all residents must report to our office, the kicker. The office was her garage where she had set up a folding table, a laptop, and a handwritten sign-in sheet. Not a single person showed up. I walked by slowly, coffee in hand, and she glared at me like I was trespassing on her kingdom. But the truth was obvious: her kingdom was empty. The closer we got to the hearing, the more reckless she became. She started slipping anonymous letters into neighbors' mailboxes, warning that if they didn't support her, their property values would plummet. One neighbor shoved the letter right back into her hands in broad daylight and told her to get lost. The look on her face said it all. Her power was gone, and everyone knew it. The night before the hearing, Karen made one last desperate move. I heard a knock at my door, and there she was, no sunglasses, no clipboard, just raw panic in her eyes. She tried to bargain, tried to spin it as a misunderstanding. She said things like, "We can work this out privately, and the community needs me." But I didn't budge. I reminded her that this wasn't personal, it was legal. She had crossed too many lines, and now the law was stepping in. When she left my porch that night, she wasn't strutting. She wasn't smirking. She walked away. Slow, shoulders slumped, like she finally understood what was coming. But even then, I knew Karen wasn't going to surrender quietly. She had one last card to play, and she was going to try it in court. Eviction day morning felt different. The air was heavy, the whole street quieter than usual, like everyone knew something big was about to happen. Curtains twitched as neighbors peeked outside, waiting to see what Karen would do. After weeks of drama, fake notices, and late night rants, this was the moment everyone had been anticipating. Karen didn't disappoint. She stormed out of her rental like she was marching into battle arms full of folders, wearing a blazer that looked 2 sizes too tight, and barking into her phone like she had a team of lawyers behind her. In reality, she had nothing but a pile of self-written HOA documents that weren't worth the paper they were printed on. She planted herself in the driveway, waving her stack of papers for anyone who would listen. "This eviction is illegal," she shouted, pointing toward my house. "He's violating HOA bylaws, and I have the proof right here." A few neighbors crossed their arms, others shook their heads, but nobody stepped up to back her. The woman, who once had people too scared to put out a trash can on the wrong day, now stood completely alone. I watched calmly from my porch, sipping coffee as she scrambled to rally support. Every second that ticked by was another reminder that her power had been nothing but smoke and mirrors. The sheriff's car was scheduled to arrive later, and she knew it. You could see the panic flashing behind her fake confidence. She tried one last time to flip the script, marching across the lawn and shoving her evidence toward me. "You can't do this," she hissed. "This is bigger than you. The community needs leadership." I didn't argue. I didn't even raise my voice. I simply nodded toward the street, where the official vehicle was already turning the corner. Karen's eyes widened. For the first time, the reality hit her. This wasn't a bluff. This wasn't another game of fake fines and intimidation. This was real, legal, and final, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The second Karen saw the sheriff's vehicle rolling down the street, her whole demeanor shifted. The smugness drained from her face, replaced with sheer panic. She started pacing in circles, clutching her stack of fake HOA documents like they were a shield. Then, in a burst of desperation, she shouted at the top of her lungs, "This entire eviction is fraud. He's abusing his power as a landlord, and I won't stand for it." Her voice echoed across the lake, but instead of rallying support, it just drew more curtains open. Neighbors who had been quietly watching for weeks stepped onto their porches, arms folded, whispering to each other. Some even had their phones out, recording. Karen wanted an audience. Well, now she had one. She darted toward one neighbor's yard, waving her papers like they were sacred scrolls. "You have to back me up. This affects all of us," she begged. But the neighbor just raised an eyebrow and said, "Karen, you don't even own that house." "He does." The color drained from her cheeks as laughter rippled quietly from a few porches. That's when she snapped. She tore one of her own flyers in half and screamed, "You're all blind. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart." She pointed toward me, her hand shaking. "And he's the reason why? He's destroying everything we built." But instead of siding with her, the neighbors turned their eyes to me. Calm, quiet, standing firm on my porch while she unraveled in front of everyone. The contrast couldn't have been clearer, her chaos versus my composure. And then, like clockwork, the sheriff's car pulled to a stop in front of her rental. The moment Karen had dreaded was here, and no amount of yelling or fake titles could stop what was about to happen. And that, right there, was the end of Karen's so-called empire. All the fake fines, the late-night rants, the flyers, the power trips, it all collapsed the moment real authority showed up. The woman who once strutted around like she owned the neighborhood had nothing left but a stack of worthless papers and a reputation she'd never lived down. It's funny how people like that think they can bully their way into control, but the truth always catches up. At the end of the day, the law doesn't recognize fake titles, and neighbors don't respect fear for long. And Karen? Well, she learned the hard way that you don't mess with someone who holds the real keys, not just to the property, but to the truth. So, what do you think? Was I too patient letting her dig her own grave, or would you have shut her down way earlier? Let me know in the comments. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA nightmare or a Karen of your own, I want to hear your story. Don't forget to hit that like button if you enjoyed watching this meltdown unravel, and subscribe for more wild tales you won't believe actually happened. Until next time, stay sharp, stay calm, and never let a fake HOA president tell you how to live.